Hi, my friends. My name is Shannon. Welcome to the Cozy Tea Place. Let me just grab my tea. This wouldn't be right to start without it. We are here to read through Sense and Sensibility before October 17th when the newest film adaptation comes out, Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, just to be clear. And today we are reading through chapters 10, 11, and 12. We're really getting into the thick of things. We get to see some interactions between characters that we have not seen speak directly to each other yet. We get to get a lot of insight into Willoughby as a character, and we also get to see the Dashwoods from a brand new perspective. So I'm really excited to dive into today with you. But first, if you're new, please feel free to go back to the first episode where we tackle chapters 1 through 3. And I also do a bit of a literary history lesson about Jane Austen herself and the novel itself. And there's also a precursor kind of things to know about her writing style, prose, and stuff like that before you get started with her writing and her novels. So please feel free to go back and listen to that first, and then that way you'll also know what's going on in these chapters, so it only makes sense. One little disclaimer before we get started. I am by no means an expert. I'm just a lover of Jane Austen and of books and of writing and of characters. I don't know everything. I do my best to explain things that are particularly confusing or unclear, but also sometimes I ask you guys and I ask for insight in the comments because I can't always understand what they're trying to say in the year 1800, circa 1800. So where we left off, Marianne was just rescued by Willoughby, who carries her into the house like a true hero and is such a gentleman, and all of the ladies are basically swooning. That's where we left off. So we're kind of picking up right where we left off. Chapter 10. Marianne's preserver, as Margaret, with more elegance than precision, styled Willoughby, called at the cottage early the next morning to make his personal inquiries. He was received by Mrs. Dashwood with more than politeness, with a kindness which Sir John's account of him and her own gratitude prompted, and everything that passed during the visit tended to assure him of the sense, elegance, mutual affection, and domestic comfort of the family to whom accident had now introduced him. Of their personal charms, he had not required a second interview to be convinced. This is so interesting. We're getting to see the ladies from an outside perspective through the eyes of Willoughby here, which is so much fun. Miss Dashwood, so Elinor, had a delicate complexion, regular features, and a remarkably pretty figure. Marianne was still handsomer. Her form, though not so correct as her sister's in having the advantage of height, was more striking, and her face was so lovely that when in the common cant of praise she was called a beautiful girl, truth was less violently outraged than usually happens. Her skin was very brown, but from its transparency, her complexion was uncommonly brilliant. Her features were all good, her smile was sweet and attractive, and in her eyes, which were very dark, there was a life, a spirit, an eagerness which could hardly be seen without delight. From Willoughby, their expression, or Marianne's eyes, the expression in her eyes, was at first held back by the embarrassment which the remembrance of his assistance created. But when this passed away, when her spirits became collected, when she saw that to the perfect good breeding of the gentleman he united frankness and vivacity, and above all, when she heard him declare that of music and dancing he was passionately fond, she gave him such a look of approbation as secured the largest share of his discourse to herself for the rest of his stay. Okay, so interesting to see the girls through Willoughby's eyes. He is clearly taken with Marianne, and it sounds like she's pretty embarrassed and had difficulty kind of opening up at first, but as soon as he started talking about music or just things he's passionate about, really, she just approved right away. She basically dominated his time. She was like, "You're going to be talking to me and only to me. Thank you so much." It was only necessary to mention any favorite amusement to engage her to talk. She could not be silent when such points were introduced, and she had neither shyness nor reserve in their discussion. They speedily discovered that their enjoyment of dancing and music was mutual, and that it arose from a general conformity of judgment in all that related to either. Encouraged by this to a further examination of his opinions, she proceeded to question him on the subject of books. Her favorite authors were brought forward and dwelt upon with so rapturous a delight that any young man of 25 must have been insensible indeed not to become an immediate convert to the excellence of such works, however disregarded before. So, a couple pieces of information here. Willoughby is 25 years old, very different than the age that Marianne had clearly had a problem with when speaking of Colonel Brandon, who is 35. Still quite a bit older than her, but clearly she's less bothered. And we also learn here that Marianne speaks with such passion about the things that she loves, particularly books here, that, Willoughby's like, any young man would be an idiot to not say that he liked the book or to look into the book because she is so enthusiastic about it. Their taste was strikingly alike. The same books, the same passages were idolized by each, or if any difference appeared, any objection arose, it lasted no longer than till the force of her arguments and the brightness of her eyes could be displayed. He acquiesced in all of her decisions, caught all of her enthusiasm, and long before his visit concluded, they conversed with the familiarity of a long established acquaintance. So, very, very fast friends because they're bonding on everything. But it does sound like Willoughby kind of gave in to all of her opinions and agreed with her and just kind of caught on to all of the things that she said she liked. We'll see if he holds those same opinions truly, but he clearly loved her energy. Well, Marianne, said Elinor, as soon as he had left them, for one morning, I think you have done pretty well. You have already ascertained Mr. Willoughby's opinion in almost every matter of importance. You know what he thinks of Cowper and Scott. You are certain of his you are certain of his estimating their beauties as he ought, and you have received every assurance of his admiring Pope no more than is proper. But how is your acquaintance to be long supported under such extraordinary dispatch of every subject for discourse? You will soon have exhausted each favorite topic. Another meeting will suffice to explain his sentiments on picturesque beauty and second marriages, and then you can have nothing further to ask. Elinor, cried Marianne, is this fair? Is this just? Are my ideas so scanty? But I see what you mean. I have been too much at ease, too happy, too frank. I have erred against every commonplace notion of decorum. I have been open and sincere where I ought to have been reserved, spiritless, dull, and deceitful. Had I talked only of the weather and the roads, and had I spoken only once in 10 minutes, this reproach would have been spared. This lecture. So Eleanor is kind of like, what the heck are you going to talk about next time? Because you talked about everything. And Marianne is like, yes, if I had been more dull, then you could have spared me this lecture. My love, said her mother, you must not be offended with Elinor. She was only in jest. I should scold her myself if she were capable of wishing to check the delight of your conversation with our new friend. Marianne was softened in a moment. So Marianne got a little bit defensive. Elinor, I think she was joking a little. I do think it was in jest. I don't think she was trying to poke at or instigate or hurt Marianne by any means. But I do think that it's interesting, as we're going to see in the next couple of chapters. I do think that Eleanor's frustration with her situation, her grief that she's dealing with her father, the sadness that comes with not knowing what's going on with Edward and not knowing when she's going to see him again, I think it comes out with a little bit of snark and a little bit of sharpness in how she speaks to people. She's never rude, but you'll see what I mean. Willoughby, on his side, gave every proof of his pleasure in their acquaintance, which an evident wish of improving it could offer. He came to them every day. To inquire after Marianne was at first his excuse. I lost my place. To inquire after Marianne was at first his excuse, but the encouragement of his reception, to which every day gave greater kindness, made such an excuse unnecessary before it had ceased to be possible by Marianne's perfect recovery. She was confined for some days to the house, but never had any confinement been less irksome. Willoughby was a young man of good abilities, quick imagination, lively spirits, and open, affectionate manners. He was exactly formed to engage Marianne's heart, for with all this he joined not only a captivating person, but a natural ardor of mind, which was now roused and increased by the example of her own, and which recommended him to her affection beyond everything else. So Willoughby's literally perfect for Marianne, or exactly what she thinks she wants. His society became gradually her most exquisite enjoyment. His society is like his company. They read, they talked, they sang together. His musical talents were considerable, and he read with all the sensibility and spirit which Edward had unfortunately wanted. Remember when Marianne gave Edward such a hard time, or she spoke to the mother about how Edward, I think it was to mom, about how Edward just had absolutely no passion when reading at all, and she felt bad for Elinor because of it. But Willoughby does not have that problem. In Mrs. Dashwood's estimation, he was as faultless as in Marianne's, so Mum loves him just as much as Marianne. And Elinor saw nothing to censure in him but a propensity in which he strongly resembled and peculiarly delighted her sister, of saying too much what he thought on every occasion without attention to persons or circumstances. In hastily forming and giving his opinion of other people, in sacrificing general politeness to the enjoyment of undivided attention where his heart was engaged, and in slighting too easily the forms of worldly propriety, he displayed a want of caution which Elinor could not approve, in spite of all that he and Marianne could say in its support. He's like honest without tact. Like he'll just say things without without acknowledging whether it is kind or honest or useful. He hastily forms opinions about other people, about situations, and in the name of the shock and awe. Like, I think he really enjoys getting the attention that comes with saying something out of line. And Marianne's kind of like that as well. Her motivation, I don't think, is the same, but she does have the thing where she will just say what she feels and, forget propriety and forget what that person feels about it. This is how I feel, and that's why I'm going to say it, right? So he has that as well. It's just a little different. Marianne began now to perceive that the desperation which had seized her at 16 and a half of ever seeing a man who could satisfy her ideas of perfection had been rash and unjustifiable. Remember when she was like, "Oh, I'll never find someone." What did she say? "I require too much," I think is what it was. So she's kind of like backtracking on that. She's like, "No, he's perfect." Willoughby was all that her fancy had delineated in that unhappy hour in every brighter period as capable of attaching her, and his behavior declared his wishes to be in that respect as earnest as his ability was strong. So he does seem sincere. Her mother, too, in whose mind not one speculative thought of their marriage had been raised by his prospect of riches, was led before the end of a week to hope and to expect it, and secretly to congratulate herself on having gained two such sons-in-law as Edward and Willoughby. So Mum is, again, totally thinking about marriage with a complete disregard of whether or not he is rich, which is how she looked at the marriage that she expects for Edward and Elinor as well. And she really likes both of these guys for her daughters. Heads up, this next paragraph, it goes into the next page, doesn't it? A little bit into the next page. My God, I don't know if you can see the notes. It's over here. It's over here. So many underlines, so many things. I had a hard time wrapping my brain around everything that was being said. So as we go through this, forgive me if I mess up. Colonel Brandon's partiality for Marianne, which had so early been discovered by his friends, now first became perceptible to Elinor when it ceased to be noticed by them. Interesting that we're basically confirming that Colonel Brandon does in fact have feelings for Marianne, which his friends picked up on, but I didn't believe it. Well, I know the story, but just as a reader reading this, taking what is on the page for what it is, I didn't believe it because I was like, it's not coming from him. I haven't seen any evidence of it. And the people that are saying that it is true are kind of unreliable in that they just love to talk. So this is an interesting confirmation that, he does have feelings for her. He does, is partial to her, his partiality. And Elinor is noticing it now as soon as it's not noticed by the people who noticed it first. So those people who noticed his liking first, their attention and wit were drawn off to his more fortunate rival, Willoughby. Let me just go get my puppy. Please excuse me. We're back, baby. It might be time to clip the microphone. Oh my God, I have this shirt on backwards. Now that we have our guest, so their attention and wit were drawn off to his more fortunate rival, who is Willoughby, and the raillery which the other had incurred before any partiality arose was removed when his feelings began really to call for the ridicule so justly annexed to sensibility. Okay. So now that the others are distracted by Willoughby, Brandon's like, "Oh, I do like her." And it's like, okay, now he would be worthy of the ridicule that the others brought up first. I wonder if they kind of planted the seed for him to find his liking for her. Elinor was obliged, though unwillingly, to believe that the sentiments which Mrs. Jennings had assigned him for her own satisfaction were now actually excited by her sister. Agitated, and that however a general resemblance of disposition between the parties might forward the affection of Mr. Willoughby, an equally striking opposition of character was no hindrance to the regard of Colonel Brandon. Okay, so Elinor is noticing that Brandon has a liking for Marianne, and she is thinking that now, like, the thing that Mrs. Jennings made up about Colonel Brandon liking Marianne, she's being like, "Oh, okay, this is actually real now," and Marianne is making it worse. Not putting the blame on Marianne, but being excited by her sister Marianne being herself and doing what she's doing is kind of adding fuel to the fire of Brandon liking her. And it sounds like Elinor thinks that Marianne and Willoughby like each other so much because they are so similar, but she is observing that maybe the differences between Marianne and Colonel Brandon are adding to what is making her so appealing to him. I feel like I'm putting together a puzzle. And I'm sure like some of this probably comes more naturally to others, but thank you for being here with me. She saw it with concern, Elinor. For what could a silent man of 35 hope when opposed to a very lively one of 25? And as she could not even wish him successful, she heartily wished him indifferent. So she's like, I really hope he just doesn't care. Because Elinor, we're going to notice again, I kind of mentioned the sharp, sorry, my puppy's falling off my lap. We're going to notice some of the sharp comments that she has in jest. But I think we also in these chapters notice how much empathy she has, how sensitive she is to everyone in the room. Again, very like eldest daughter sort of themes here. So she's like, I don't think he's going to be successful. I'm not even sure I can wish for him to be successful in his pursuit for Marianne, but I don't want him to be hurt. She liked him. In spite of his gravity and reserve, she beheld him in an object of interest. His manners, though serious, were mild, and his reserve appeared rather the result of some oppression of spirits than of any natural gloominess of temper. Sir John had dropped hints of past injuries and disappointments, which justified her belief of his being an unfortunate man, and she regarded him with respect and compassion. So again, empath Elinor senses that Brandon is the way he is. He is so grave and reserved because of things that he's been through, not because it is his natural way. Perhaps she pitied and esteemed him the more because he was slighted by Willoughby and Marianne, who, prejudiced against him for being neither lively nor young, seemed resolved to undervalue his merits. Oh my god, I just so feel Elinor. She's such a feeler, even though she is considered like the logical, grounded, reasonable, sensible one. This is so interesting too because Willoughby is young. He's 25. Marianne is younger. She's 17. And Willoughby and Marianne having the same maturity level, a 25-year-old man having the same maturity level as a 17-year-old girl is crazy. I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like it. Brandon is just the kind of man, said Willoughby one day when they were talking of him together, whom everybody speaks well of and nobody cares about, whom all are delighted to see and nobody remembers to talk to. I literally have in my notes, is this supposed to sound like a record scratch? Hold up. Wait a second. Does he suck? Willoughby? I have so many things to say about Willoughby. It is crazy. That is exactly what I think of him, cried Marianne. Do not boast of it, however, said Elinor, for it is injustice in both of you. He is highly esteemed by all the family at the park, and I never see him myself without taking pains to converse with him. That he is patronized by you, or supported by you, replied Willoughby, is certainly in his favor. But as for the esteem of the others, it is a reproach in itself, or like a condemnation in itself. Who would submit to the indignity or insult of being approved by such women as Lady Middleton and Mrs. Jennings that could command the indifference of anybody else? So Willoughby is literally, yes, Lady Middleton and Mrs. Jennings can be a little ridiculous or boring or whatever, like, each of them. But he is simultaneously in one fell swoop disrespecting Colonel Brandon, Lady Middleton, and Mrs. Jennings. He's like, well, these people are the people that respect him, and I don't respect those people, so why should I respect him? And who would want the insult of being respected by those people? Oh boy, I have so many things to say. Let's continue. So Elinor replies, but perhaps the abuse of such people as yourself and Marianne will make amends for the regard of Lady Middleton and her mother. If their praise is censure, your censure may be praise, for they are not more undiscerning than you are prejudiced and unjust. Willoughby says, in defense of your protege, you can even be saucy. Saucy is like sassy. Elinor says, my protege, as you call him, is a sensible man, and sense will always have attractions for me. Yes, Marianne, even in a man between 30 and 40. He has seen a great deal of the world, has been abroad, has read, and has a thinking mind. I have found him capable of giving me much information on various subjects, and he has always answered my inquiries with readiness of good breeding and good nature. That is to say, cried Marianne contemptuously, he has told you that in the East Indies the climate is hot and the mosquitoes are troublesome. He would have told me so, I doubt not, had I made any such inquiries, but they happened to be points on which I had been previously informed. That was Elinor, and I find this interesting because I'm wondering if she was previously informed on those topics by Edward, perhaps? Maybe? I don't know. Perhaps, said Willoughby, his observations may have extended to the existence of nabobs, gold moors, and palanquins. So I Googled this sentence. He's basically implying that the colonel's knowledge is cliche. It's stuff that everyone knows. It's things that could be picked up anywhere. And he's kind of insulting him a lot. It's a very sarcastic statement. And these terms, nabobs, goldmoors, and palanquins, are historical terms from India from the colonial era. Elinor is next, and she says, I may venture to say that his observations have stretched much farther than your candor, but why should you dislike him? Willoughby, I do not dislike him. I consider him, on the contrary, as a very respectable man, who has everybody's good word and nobody's notice, who has more money than he can spend, more time than he knows how to employ, and 2 new coats every year. Add to which, cried Marianne, that he has neither genius, taste, nor spirit, that his understanding has no brilliancy, his feelings no ardor, and his voice no expression. You decide on his imperfections so much in the mass, replied Elinor, and so much in the strength of your own imagination, that the commendation I am able to give of him is comparatively cold and insipid. I can only pronounce him to be a sensible man, well bred, well informed, and of gentle address, and I believe possessing an amiable heart. Miss Dashwood, cried Willoughby, you are now using me unkindly. You are endeavoring to disarm me by reason, and to convince me against my will, but it will not do. You shall find me as stubborn as you can be artful. I have 3 unanswerable reasons for disliking Colonel Brandon. He has threatened me with rain when I wanted it to be fine. He has found fault with the hanging of my curricle, and I cannot persuade him to buy my brown mare. If it will be any satisfaction to you, however, to be told that I believe his character to be in other respects irreproachable, I am ready to confess it. And in return for an acknowledgment which must give me some pain, you cannot deny me the privilege of disliking him as much as ever. That is the end of chapter 10. I have so many things to say. So we meet Willoughby in a far more official setting, and through him we get to see the Dashwoods in a new light, especially like bits of their physical appearance, which is really fun and interesting because I don't know that we've gotten that much of that from another character. I think we did a little bit for Mrs. Jennings, but just really fun to see them through someone else's eyes, literally, right? I really am thoroughly enjoying getting Elinor's very grounded perspective through this chapter, especially her opinions on Marianne, Willoughby, and Brandon. I think that it's really interesting that she is used basically as like the only reliable narrator in a way, the only person who is seeing things clearly. Now, Willoughby is a walking red flag to me. I'm sorry. I don't like him at all. And it's really interesting to me because in the 1995 film, he is played very kind, very endearing, very charming. I shouldn't, maybe not endearing, but very charming. Like the charisma is off the charts. And I suppose that that is the case for Willoughby in the novel as well. Like I wouldn't fall for it. Like, do you know what I mean? I know Marianne would because she's young and naive and idealistic and hasn't learned any lessons in love and all of these things. I understand it. I just find it so interesting how he is portrayed in the film and how I am not reacting to his character the way I expected to. Still, let me know what your thoughts are on Willoughby. How do you feel Jane Austen intended for Willoughby to be portrayed here? Do you think the people who have been through certain lessons and trials and tribulations in love or otherwise, or who are more mature, are meant to see him as a possible, again, red flag, like to use modern terms? Do you think that Elinor is a reliable narrator, even though she does seem to have the most clear understanding of the humans around her? Do you think that she's biased, even though she's the most level headed character in the group? Let me know. And also, again, I mentioned it a little bit, but this is the first time in the read through that I have felt a disconnect between the novel and the 1995 film adaptation. And I'm curious if you have seen the book. I'm curious if you've had a point like that already, or if Willoughby is that moment for you. Or, if I am the only one watching the movie that, at first was like, maybe he's okay. And in the novel, I'm like, he's not okay at all. Another thought on that on Willoughby is that he's played very kind in the book, in the movie, I would say, as opposed to in the book where he just kind of, it's very clear that he's not, but Marianne thinks he is. And I'm wondering if it's because we have a better insight into Elinor's mind through the novel as opposed to the movie. And that's just because of the medium that's being used, but the novel is obviously more like fleshed out in that we know what Elinor is thinking. We get more dialogue, we get more conversation, we get more of an understanding of the dynamics. And you can only cover so much of that in like one scene in the movie. And I'm wondering if it's because in a movie we can't necessarily get an inner dialogue or, the perspective work that we get through a novel. So I wonder if that's why I feel so differently. Because I can't necessarily be in Elinor's head in the movie, but I can much more so in the novel. So I don't know, just some thoughts. Let me know what you think. Chapter 11. Little had Mrs. Dashwood or her daughters imagined, when they first came to Devonshire, that so many engagements would arise to occupy their time as shortly presented themselves, or that they should have such frequent invitations and such constant visitors as to leave them little leisure for serious employment. Yet such was the case. When Marianne was recovered, the schemes of amusement at home and abroad, which Sir John had been previously forming, were put in execution. The private balls of the park then began, and parties on the water were made and accomplished as often as a showery October would allow. So it's October. And so I'm not really sure how much time has passed. Oh no, it was September, so it's only been like about a month. In every meeting of the kind, Willoughby was included, and the ease and familiarity which naturally attended these parties were exactly calculated to give increasing intimacy of his acquaintance with the Dashwoods, to afford him opportunity of witnessing the excellencies of Marianne, of marking his animated admiration of her, and of receiving, in her behaviour to himself, the most pointed assurance of her affection. Elinor could not be surprised at their attachment. She only wished that it were less openly shown, and once or twice did venture to suggest the propriety of some self-command to Marianne. But Marianne abhorred all concealment where no disgrace could attend unreserve, and to aim at the restraint of sentiments which were not in themselves illaudable or bad, appeared to her not merely an unnecessary effort, but a disgraceful subjection of reason to commonplace and mistaken notions. So Marianne is like, it would take way more effort for me to conceal how I feel about him. So I'm not going to do it. Well, it's not like out of laziness. It's like almost against her values entirely. Willoughby thought the same. Shocker. And their behavior at all times was an illustration of their opinions. When he was present, she had no eyes for anyone else. Everything he did was right. Everything he said was clever. If their evenings at the park were concluded with cards, he cheated himself and all the rest of the party to get her a good hand. If dancing formed the amusement of the night, they were partners for half the time, and when obliged to separate for a couple of dances, were carefully to stand together and scarcely spoke a word to anybody else. Such conduct made them, of course, most exceedingly laughed at, but ridicule could not shame and seemed hardly to provoke them. Okay, a little change of scenery. We just got to work with what we got. So, Marianne and Willoughby are being essentially like social nuisances and embarrassments, and they're kind of disregarding all propriety and any regard for what's acceptable, because they both kind of rebel against that, or rebel against anything that means they need to suppress themselves and their passion for things in life and each other. I feel like to an extent this also wouldn't fly or feel good or right today. It's not that they're being suppressed by the measures of society. They're in company and they're being rude and secluding themselves and not talking to anyone else and laughing at people in the name of being free of with what they think and not giving a care. And that's just rude. Like, it's not just that they're not conforming to the rules of society at the time. They're just being not great. So Mrs. Dashwood entered into all of her feelings with a warmth which left her no inclination for checking this excessive display of them. So Mrs. Dashwood just loves them so much, she's not getting them into line at all. To her, it was but a natural consequence of a strong affection and a young and ardent mind. I also really do feel that Willoughby is a love bomber. Like, he is just coming in hot, like, fully just, I don't know, just throwing himself into it, but in a way where Marianne is, he's a love bomber. I'm not going to say anything else. Let it be what it is. It's just the truth. And of course, Marianne is this like young, doe-eyed girl who is like, wow, I've just met the man of my dreams. I never thought it would happen. And she's just taking everything as truth and for what it is, and thinks that he is like made of gold and sunshine and goodness. This was the season of happiness to Marianne. Her heart was devoted to Willoughby, and the fond attachment to Norland, which she brought with her from Sussex, was more likely to be softened than she had thought it possible before by the charms which his society bestowed on her present home. So this place isn't so bad compared to their old home, Norland, because Willoughby is there. Elinor's happiness was not so great. Her heart was not so much at ease, nor her satisfaction in their amusements so pure. They afforded her no companion that could make amends for what she had left behind, nor that could teach her to think of Norland with less regret than ever. Oh my God. She is so sad and struggling. Oh, it's tough. Neither Lady Middleton nor Mrs. Jennings could supply to her the conversation she missed, although the latter was an everlasting talker, and from the first she had regarded her with a kindness which ensured her a large share of her discourse. She had already repeated her own history to Elinor 3 or 4 times, and had Elinor's memory been equal to her means of improvement, she might have known very early in their acquaintance all the particulars of Mrs. Jennings' last illness, and what he said to his wife, Mr. Jennings's last illness, and what he said to his wife a few minutes before he died. Lady Middleton was more agreeable than her mother, only on being more silent. Elinor needed little observation to perceive that her reserve was a mere calmness of manner with which sense had nothing to do. Also here, just want to circle back to they afforded her no companion that could make amends for what she had left behind. Like in Edward, Elinor found someone of like mind who she could speak to on a similar level. She found something that she never really had in someone close to her, because she can't really speak to Marianne or her mother or Margaret or all of these acquaintances she's surrounded by at Barton Park. She can't really speak to them the way she would speak to anybody. Like, she's kind of on a different like level in a way. She's more understanding, more empathetic, has more sense than what I can perceive most people around her. And she's also dealing with all of these emotions, and she is just being bombarded by these people around her. And she lost like that in Edward, with no like conclusion or solace in what the relationship between them meant. Oh God, I can't imagine. Okay, back to Lady Middleton. Towards her husband and mother, she was the same as to them. So she treats her husband and her mother the same as she treats everybody else. And intimacy was therefore neither to be looked for nor desired. She had nothing to say one day that she had not said the day before. Her insipidity was invariable, and for even her spirits were always the same. And though she did not oppose the parties arranged by her husband, provided everything were conducted in style and her 2 eldest children attended her, she never appeared to receive more enjoyment from them than she might have experienced in sitting at home. And so little did her presence add to the pleasure of others by any share in their conversation, that they were sometimes only reminded her of her being amongst them by her solicitude about her troublesome boys. So solicitude is like concern, her deep concern about her troublesome boys. In Colonel Brandon alone, of all of her new acquaintance, did Elinor find a person who could in any degree claim the respective abilities, excite the interest of friendship, or give pleasure as a companion. Willoughby was out of the question. Her admiration and regard, even her sisterly regard, was all his own. But he was a lover. His attentions were wholly Marianne's, and a far less agreeable man might have been more generally pleasing. So not Marianne, Elinor is like someone who is less likable would be more pleasing than Willoughby. It sounds like he's almost so likable and charming that he's a little fake from Elinor's perspective, perhaps. Colonel Brandon, unfortunately for himself, had no such encouragement to think only of Marianne, and in conversing with Elinor, he found the greatest consolation for the total indifference of her sister. So Elinor and Colonel Brandon have a little bit of a bond here. And just going back to that first sentence, it touches on very much what we were saying with how much Elinor is missing Edward's company, not only because she liked him and esteemed him, but because he was kind of on the same level as her as far as what's mentioned here, a person who could in any degree claim the respective abilities, excite the interest of friendship, or give pleasure as a companion. And she is finding a little bit of that solace in Colonel Brandon. And I will have more to say on the relationship between Elinor and Brandon at the end of the chapter, but I don't want to give anything away. Elinor's compassion for him increased as she had reason to suspect that the misery of disappointed love had already been known by him. So he's not unfamiliar with being rejected, in a sense, if you will, or just being upset by a love situation. This suspicion was given by some words which accidentally dropped from him one evening at the park when they were sitting down together by mutual consent while the others were dancing. His eyes were fixed on Marianne, and after a silence of some minutes, he said with a faint smile, "Your sister, I understand, does not approve of second attachments." "No," replied Elinor, "her opinions are all romantic." Now, it's not stated in these moments of dialogue who is speaking. It's clear, I think, when you're reading it, at least for me with my eyeballs. So I might distinguish who is saying what line here, but just know that it's not necessarily in the text. Or if you're reading along, then you're going to notice that it's not necessarily there. Brandon says, or rather, as I believe she considers them impossible to exist. Elinor, I believe she does, but how she contrives it without reflecting on the character of her own father, who had himself 2 wives, I know not. A few years, however, will settle her opinions on the reasonable basis of common sense and observation, and then they may be more easy to define and to justify than they are now, by anybody but herself. This will probably be the case, he replied, and yet there is something so amiable in the prejudices of a young mind that one is sorry to see them give way to the reception of more general opinions. Oof. I cannot agree with you there, said Elinor. There are inconveniences attending such feelings as Marianne's, which all the charms of enthusiasm and ignorance of the world cannot atone for. Her systems have all the unfortunate tendency of setting propriety at naught or at zero. And a better acquaintance with the world is what I look forward to as her greatest possible advantage. So this is really interesting, seeing each of their points of view on Marianne. Elinor is like, she needs life experience stat because she's kind of making a fool out of herself. I don't wish to see her get hurt, but she's also like, she needs to get hurt in some way. She's not like thinking specifically about that, but she's like, she needs to learn. She needs to learn and kind of be brought down to earth. Meanwhile, Brandon is like, there is something so nice about a mind that is kind of untouched by other opinions before they kind of give way to what is expected and the general opinion, and going with the flow and going along with everything, because that kind of happens to everybody. I think when we're young, a lot of us are more idealistic or have these big ideas and this idea of what the world is, and then as you get older, it kind of falls apart, and you kind of have to rebuild it in order to keep that idealism, but it does fall apart, and you have realizations that the world is different than you expect, or things happen that you don't expect, and there's kind of no stopping that from happening. But Brandon is like, don't wish for it to happen. Don't wish for her to be brought down from her romantic view of the world. But Elinor still is like, no, she needs to come down to earth. After a short pause, he resumed the conversation by saying, "Does your sister make no distinction in her objections against a second attachment, or is it equally criminal in everybody? Are those who have been disappointed in their first choice, whether from inconstancy of its object or the perverseness of circumstances, to be equally indifferent during the rest of their lives?" He's like, okay, well, is it all equal? Is nobody worthy of a second chance, whether their circumstances were against them or whether they made a choice? Like, is her opinion, is it a very staunch opinion that has no wiggle room, basically? Elinor says, "Upon my word, I am not acquainted with the minutiae of her principles. I only know that I never yet heard her admit in any instance of a second attachment's being pardonable or excusable or allowed or acceptable." This is so fun. She says, "I am not acquainted with the minutiae of her principles," which reminded me so much. If you go back to, I'm not sure what page it would be for you, but if you go back to page 22, in chapter 4, when Elinor and Marianne are talking about Edward, Marianne says, "I have not had so many opportunities of estimating the minuter propensities of his mind." And then Elinor uses it again in conversation back to her. But I just found this so interesting and similar to what Marianne was saying about Edward. And here Elinor is saying something similar about Marianne. "This," said he, "cannot hold, or will not hold. But a total change of sentiments. No, no, do not desire it. For when the romantic refinements of a young mind are obliged to give way, how frequently are they succeeded by such opinions as are but too common and too dangerous? I speak from experience. I once knew a lady who in temper and mind greatly resembled your sister, who thought and judged like her, but who from an enforced change, from a series of unfortunate circumstances," here he stopped suddenly, "appeared to think that he had said too much, and by his countenance gave rise to conjectures or guesses which might not otherwise have entered Elinor's head. The lady would have probably passed without suspicion, had he not convinced Miss Dashwood that what concerned her ought not to escape his lips. As it was, it required but a slight effort of fancy to connect his emotion with the tender recollection of past regard. Elinor attempted no more, but Marianne, in her place, would have not done so little. The whole story would have been speedily formed under her active imagination, and everything established in the most melancholy order of disastrous love. Okay, chapter 11. Whoa, I feel like this one was a doozy. So we start off, we're partying. There are a lot of parties. Everybody's going, and kind of the main event of the parties is Marianne and Willoughby. And Elinor is concerned. We get a lot of insight into Elinor's pain in this chapter, her pain of leaving Norland, her pain of leaving Edward behind, or, not that she chose it. There's a very clear picture of how she is taking on everyone else's stories, like with that example of Mrs. Jennings, how she knows everything about her life, but Mrs. Jennings knows nothing about hers. But she's taking on all of these things with her family, with others, without batting an eye. And meanwhile, she is stuffing hers down, like way down. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the first conversation or direct dialogue that we have had with Colonel Brandon. I loved it. I love this interaction between Elinor and Brandon. It almost feels like a breath of fresh air after all of the conversations before. like it feels like Elinor is kind of on a level playing field with somebody. It's nice to hear from someone who is of the same demeanor as her, and who is seeing things clearly, and is not only seeing things clearly, but is seeing things clearly and differently than Elinor. It's not like there's only one correct way to see things when you are level-headed or reasonable or needing to be grounded. There's room to have multiple opinions in that space, and I found that really, really interesting and lovely to read. So there is also a lot going on here. We get a little glimpse of Brandon's backstory. He once knew a young lady very much like Marianne, and he goes on to say, or to start to say, that she was really affected by an unfortunate event, and that it sounds like very much affected how she was as a person, but he kind of stops himself before he says more. So we are getting a little bit more insight into maybe why Brandon is so reserved and quiet. Forgive me, I'm just looking at my notes right down here, but this novel very much feels like a meditation on the intricacies of human nature, or the minutia of principles, or the minuter propensities of the mind, if you will. It's like a study on nature versus nurture, how sisters versus sisters, or married couples versus other married couples, how everyone is similar and different, how mothers are similar and different. There's so much analyzing of the differences between people, and it is starting to feel like the novel itself as a whole, it's a study on how people differ and the human intricacies and nature and nurture of everyone, not just of Elinor and Marianne representing Sense and Sensibility. Bringing this around to Elinor, she's so empathetic. Like, this girl can read a room like no one's business. And I think it is because she's needed to be so aware of everything because of the people that she's surrounded with. But, tying it into nature versus nurture, do you think that is something she was born with? She is innately compassionate and empathetic and aware and an observer and reserved. Or do you think this is something that developed over time due to circumstances and the people that she is surrounded by? Nature versus nurture. Let me know. And the other question for chapter 11 is that Brandon seems to almost find a comfort and a sense of nostalgia from Marianne's narrow-mindedness, or her naivety, if you will. All of that comes with being young and unexperienced and untouched by the harshness of life. Elinor sees it as a flaw that will send her down paths of, not good stuff. Do you understand both sides? Do you understand where Brandon and Elinor are coming from? Or are you staunchly in the camp of one or the other? Let me know what your thoughts are on that as well. I loved this chapter. I feel like I could talk and write and have thoughts on this chapter and the insight that we get into so many characters and the dynamics and everything for a long time. But alas, we will move on to chapter 12. Chapter 12. As Elinor and Marianne were walking together the next morning, the latter communicated a piece of news to her sister which, in spite of all that she knew before of Marianne's imprudence or carelessness and want of thought, surprised her by its extravagant testimony of both. So Marianne is about to drop some crazy news that surprised even Elinor, who knows that she is prone to being careless and reckless. Marianne told her with the greatest delight that Willoughby had given her a horse, one that he had bred himself on his estate in Somersetshire, and Somersetshire, and which was exactly calculated to carry a woman, without considering that it was not in her mother's plan to keep any horse, that if she were to alter her resolution or opinion in favor of this gift, she must buy another for the servant and keep a servant to ride it, and after all, build a stable to receive them. She had accepted the present without hesitation and told her sister of it in raptures, in much excitement. He intends to send his groom into Somersetshire immediately for it, she added, and when it arrives, we will ride every day. You shall share its use with me. Imagine to yourself, my dear Elinor, the delight of a gallop in some of these downs. Most unwilling was she to awaken from such a dream of felicity to comprehend all the unhappy truths which attended the affair, and for some time she refused to submit to them. As to an additional servant, the expense would be a trifle. Mamma, she was sure, would never object to it, and any horse would do for him or the servant that's going to take care of the horses. He might always get one at the park. As to a stable, the merest shed would be sufficient. So Marianne's coming with all of these reasons why they can figure it out and pay for it. Elinor then ventured to doubt the propriety of her receiving a present from a man so little, or at least so lately, known to her. This was too much. You are mistaken, Elinor, she said warmly, in supposing I know but little of Willoughby. I have not known him long, indeed, but I am much better acquainted with him than I am with any other creature in the world, except yourself and mamma. It is not time or opportunity that is to determine intimacy. It is disposition alone. 7 years would be insufficient to make some people acquainted with each other, and 7 days are more than enough for others. I should hold myself guilty of greater impropriety in accepting a horse from my brother than from Willoughby. Of John I know very little, though we have lived together for years, but of Willoughby my judgment has long been formed. This is really interesting because I think that she's not wrong, but I think that she's not in the right situation. I think that it's true that you can connect with somebody very quickly and then other connections can take a very long time or just a longer time. I don't think that the sentiment here is incorrect, but there is a sense of fallacy and impropriety in this connection with Marianne and Willoughby that while there is truth to what she's saying, it doesn't feel right. Elinor thought it wisest to touch on that point no more. She knew her sister's temper. Opposition on so tender a subject would only attach her the more to her own opinion. But by an appeal to her affection for her mother, by representing the inconveniences which that indulgent mother must draw on herself, if, as would probably be the case, she consented to this increase of establishment, Marianne was shortly subdued, and she promised not to tempt her mother to such imprudent kindness by mentioning the offer, and to tell Willoughby when she saw him next that it must be declined. So the only thing that convinces Marianne that it's not a good idea or it's something that she won't follow through with or that she won't accept is the position that it would put her mother in by, her needing to make financial decisions that are unfair. And she just won't do that to her mom. So that's the only thing that gets her to change her mind. And Elinor played on that. Elinor appealed to her affection for her mother. So Elinor knows what, I don't know, Marianne's weaknesses are, I suppose. It's not a weakness, but she knows what will bring sense forward in Marianne, which is very interesting. She was faithful to her word, and when Willoughby called at the cottage the same day, Elinor heard her express her disappointment to him in a low voice on being obliged to forego the acceptance of his present. The reason for this alteration were at the same time related, and they were such as to make further entreaty on his side impossible. His concern, however, was very apparent, and after expressing it with earnestness, he added in the same low voice, "But Marianne, the horse is still yours. Though you cannot use it now, I shall keep it only till you can claim it. When you leave Barton to form your own establishment in a more lasting home, Queen Mab shall receive you." Queen Mab is presumably the name of the horse. This was all overheard by Miss Dashwood, or Elinor, and in the whole of the sentence, in his manner of pronouncing it, and in his addressing her sister by her Christian name alone, she instantly saw an intimacy so decided, a meaning so direct, as marked a perfect agreement between them. From that moment she doubted not of their being engaged to each other, and the belief of it created no other surprise than that she or any of their friends should be left by tempers so frank to discover it by accident. They're making it very obvious that they're engaged or that there is like a very serious agreement that has happened here. You just don't go around calling people by their, first name in such an intimate way and making promises of like, oh, but you'll have your horse when you're at him, insinuating like a more established home, like you're insinuating marriage. And so to Elinor, who is overhearing this, it is very clear that to her that there must be an agreement between the two of these Young lovers. Margaret, the youngest sister, who we haven't heard from, Margaret related something to her the next day, which placed this matter in a still clearer light. Willoughby had spent the preceding evening with them, and Margaret, by being left some time in the parlor with only him and Marianne, had had opportunity for observations which, with the most important face, she communicated to her eldest sister when they were next by themselves. "Oh, Elinor," she cried, "I have such a secret to tell you about Marianne. I am sure she will be married to Mr. Willoughby very soon." "You have said so," replied Elinor, "almost every day since they first met on High Church Down, and they have not and they had not known each other a week, I believe, before you were certain that Marianne wore his picture round her neck, but it turned out to be only the miniature of our great uncle. But indeed, this is quite another thing. I am sure they will be married very soon, for he has got a lock of her hair. Take care, Margaret, it may only be the hair of some great uncle of his." "But indeed, Elinor, it is Marianne's. I am almost sure it is, for I saw him cut it off. Last night after tea, when you and mamma went out of the room, they were whispering and talking to each other as fast as could be, and he seemed to be begging something of her. And presently he took up her scissors and cut off a long lock of her hair, for it was all tumbled down around her neck, and he kissed it and folded it up in a piece of white paper and put it into his pocketbook." From such particulars, stated on such authority, Elinor could not withhold her credit. Nor was she disposed to it, for the circumstance was in perfect unison with what she had heard and seen herself. So it's, so similar to the situation that she saw where they were, whispering and talking about how she'll have the horse one day, that she's like, "I believe you." She's like, "I know Margaret's telling the truth." Margaret's sagacity or wisdom was not always displayed in a way so satisfactory to her sister, so she doesn't always admire how wise and observant Margaret is. When Mrs. Jennings attacked her one evening, so attacked Elinor one evening at the park, or the main house, to give the name of the young man who was Elinor's particular favorite, which had been a long matter of great curiosity to her, Margaret answered by looking at her sister and saying, "I must not tell, may I, Elinor?" This, of course, made everybody laugh, and Elinor tried to laugh too, but the effort was painful. She was convinced that Margaret had fixed on a person whose name she could not bear with the composure, to become a standing joke with Mrs. Jennings. Marianne felt for her most sincerely, but she did more harm than good to the cause by turning very red and saying in an angry manner to Margaret, "Remember that whatever your conjectures or your theories may be, you have no right to repeat them." This is so interesting as well, because even when Marianne is aware of someone being, or Elinor, someone she loves dearly, being embarrassed or in a precarious situation that is not wanted, she's aware she wants to stop it, but she still does not go about it in a sensible way. She kind of causes more of a scene. "I never had any conjectures about it," replied Margaret. "It was you who told me of it yourself." This increased the mirth of the company, and Margaret was eagerly pressed to say something more. "Oh, pray, Miss Margaret, let us know all about it," said Mrs. Jennings. "What's the gentleman's name?" "I must not tell, Mom, but I know very well what it is, and I know where he is, too." "Yes, yes, we can guess where he is. At his own house at Norland, to be sure. He is the curate of the parish, I dare say." "No, that he is not. He is of no profession at all." "Margaret," said Marianne with great warmth, "you know that all this is an invention of your own, and that there is no such person in existence." "Well, then he is lately dead, Marianne, for I am sure there was such a man once, and his name begins with an F." The sass! Most grateful did Elinor feel to Lady Middleton for observing at this moment that it had rained very hard, though she believed the interruption to proceed less from any attention to her than from her ladyship's great dislike of all inelegant subjects of raillery, as delighted by her husband and mother. So again, Lady Middleton is aware of what's going on, but she's not necessarily saving the day or saving Elinor. She's just like, "Spare me from my mom and my husband, like going at it again." The idea, however, started by her, Lady Middleton, was immediately pursued by Colonel Brandon, who was on every occasion mindful of the feelings of others, and much was said on the subject of rain by both of them. Willoughby opened the pianoforte and asked Marianne to sit down to it, and thus, amidst the various endeavors of different people to quit the topic, it fell to the ground. But not so easily did Elinor recover from the alarm into which it had thrown her. A party was formed this evening for going on the following day to see a very fine place about 12 miles from Barton, belonging to a brother-in-law of Colonel Brandon, without whose interest it could not be seen, as the proprietor, who was then abroad, had left strict orders on that head. The grounds were declared to be highly beautiful, And Sir John, who was particularly warm in their praise, might be allowed to be a tolerable judge, for he had formed parties to visit them at least twice every summer for the last 10 years. They contained a noble piece of water, a sail on which was to form a great part of the morning's amusement. Cold provisions were to be taken, open carriages only to be employed, and everything conducted in the usual style of a complete party of pleasure. To some to some few of the company, it appeared rather a bold undertaking, considering the time of year, and that it had rained every day for the last fortnight, and Mrs. Dashwood, who had already a cold, was persuaded by Elinor to stay at home. Okay. A lot happening here in chapter 12 as well. Freaking Willoughby and this horse. Are you kidding me? Not only is it so thoughtless and careless of Marianne to accept without acknowledging the situation of her family, it is so incredibly crazy that Willoughby would offer them a horse knowing what their situation is like. I feel like in Elinor's mind, or at least maybe it's not just Elinor, just the perspective that we're giving in this chapter of this horse situation, I guess it is Elinor. None of the blame is placed on Willoughby at all. Like, Willoughby, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know the situation that these ladies are in. And if you don't know the particulars, if you don't know the details, then you know that they have what do they have? 3 servants total? Bruh. No. No. He's so I know I am Willoughby's number one hater. He is also so love bomby. Like, what? Dude, stop. And of course, Marianne loves it. Again, I'm just looking down at my notes here. It's not that Marianne's lack of regard for her family situation is malicious, or like, she's just careless and naive. And Willoughby is catering to her every whim. So like, I almost place less blame on Marianne than on Willoughby. Because what? Stop it. And this situation also continues to point and paint the picture of how Elinor is carrying the mental weight of the entire family, at least on the more logistic side. I think, of course, Mrs. Dashwood, the mother, carries a lot of weight, like, as to the concern for her daughters, of course. But as far as like everything else, I feel like Elinor is kind of carrying that. And also, I think because of the kind of, again, just to stay on the same thought that we were on, the kind of emotional weight, mental weight that the mother, Mrs. Dashwood, is carrying is not the same as Eleanor's, because Eleanor is like, loves her so much, loves her just as much, but it's like, you can't do that. You can't have that, because look at us. We can't handle that. We can't make that work. But I don't think for one second that if Marianne went to Mrs. Dashwood and was like, "Oh my God, Mama, Willoughby gave me a horse," I don't think for one second that Mrs. Dashwood would have told Marianne no. And I think that then it again would have fallen on Eleanor's shoulders to take care of that situation. We hear from Margaret, the littlest sister, and she has been watching and she has been observing, and she dishes out all of the details to Elinor about Marianne and Willoughby. This is such like sisterly, chatter. And then we get a little, I'm not sure if it's a flashback or it feels like a flashback, kind of out of time here with these circumstances that are happening. It's not supremely, it's not incredibly linear, but Elinor is kind of remembering or thinking about this dinner event that happened where she was incredibly embarrassed by Mrs. Jennings, and Margaret and Marianne made it worse. Marianne by trying to make it better, and Margaret just because she's so young and she just is trying to be honest and, is just being a kid. And again, Elinor had to take the fall. Like, it's just, ugh. Like, that Elinor had to sit there and politely endure her sisters, who already probably caused her gray hair at 19, had to like endure them creating the embarrassing situation based on, again, either their youth or lack of awareness or whatever. Like, my God, I feel it in my bones, like how horrible that is. And these characters also feel so real to me. It is kind of wild. Like, I feel this. I feel it. Especially Elinor. I really, really relate to her, if you can't tell. Again, we're seeing a lot of similarities between Elinor and Brandon, and I'm wondering what the purpose is behind that. Is the purpose for them to be like kind of as characters, like solace for each other throughout this haze of carelessness, or these people who are maybe not, again, on the same wavelength as them? It feels like Eleanor's empathy and Eleanor's understanding and compassion for everyone else is our path to understanding the true character of others. And while she hasn't been as much on the page as Marianne up to this point, although the last 3 chapters have been very Eleanor heavy, she is the steady through line that is keeping everything together. Everything feels like it circles back to Elinor, whether it's a situation that Marianne is in, whether it's who Margaret is sharing her information with, whether it's who they're teasing at dinner. Like, it all comes back to Elinor. Like, she is the solid, steady through line in the book, in the novel, in the story. And that is also who she is in the construct of her family, which I find really interesting and poetic. Oh my God, this video, I've needed to stop and start so many times. But we've been talking a lot about Elinor's empathy and how she also represents sense in the title of Sense and Sensibility, which is more logic and reason. Is her empathy sense at all? And do empathy and sense go hand in hand? When I first thought of this question as I was reading, and when I first, you know, I don't know, just had the thought, my answer was no. I was like, no, having a lot of empathy and compassion is so emotional and it can really affect you, and maybe make you not see things clearly. But then as I thought about it more, I was thinking that the reason and the logic comes with being able to understand more perspectives than just your own. Like, maybe the fact that you have the ability to understand this emotion, that emotion, this situation, and everything from a different perspective creates the reason and logic innately. I think yes. I almost think yes, sense and empathy go hand in hand. It seems like two different sides of a coin, one more logical and grounded and the other more emotional and aware, but maybe you need both to have both. I think for me, the answer is yes. I think they do go hand in hand, which is not what I kind of first pondered. So let me know what you think about that as well. Thank you so much for being here on this wild ride for these 3 chapters. We have been all over the house today, even with the special guest in Louis. But thank you. Let me know what your thoughts are on chapters 10, 11, and 12 of Sense and Sensibility in the comments down below. And I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye.